Be Wealthy and Smart, episode 1030.
Step into a world of wealth and financial freedom without budgets, boredom, or bosses on Be Wealthy and Smart. And now, here's your host, Linda P. Jones.
Welcome to Be Wealthy and Smart. I'm Linda P. Jones, America's Wealth Mentor, empowering women and men worldwide to financial freedom. On today's show, well, we have a big celebration because it's my 8th anniversary. Yes, believe it or not, one of my VIPs had to remind me because I got busy with all the craziness that's going on and forgot that Wednesday was my 8th anniversary of the podcast starting, April 27th, 2014. And since this is an anniversary episode, I have to bring it for you. So that means I have to do something extraordinary, extra special, over the top, so I'm going to deliver. Because I've been on Twitter the last couple of days. I don't know what got into me exactly, but some clarity just came into my mind and I was putting it out there, just letting people know what on earth is going on. In spite of all the great reporting, and there is so much great reporting being done, let me just say that our YouTube community, our Twitter community, our Facebook community of XRP is just spectacular. And with John Deaton and Jeremy Hogan, we have an amazing group of people doing research and putting it out there. So I just want to say kudos to all of them because they're doing an amazing job. And yet, with so much information coming at us, I think that we can get a little bit overwhelmed. And I think the lawsuit has been confusing for a lot of people, and rightly so. It doesn't make any sense in the first place how it all happened and why it happened and who brought it and then quit. And then the timeline getting extended recently. People are really getting a little frustrated, getting a little discouraged, I think. And I actually think that there's so much happening, much of it a little bit under the radar, that I'm going to try and point that out for you today because it's not obvious unless you really can put all the pieces together, and that's what I hope to do for you today. But before we talk about XRP, I just want to make one quick comment about yesterday's GDP report, because all year long we've been hearing the Fed say they're behind the curve, they need to raise rates faster, they're going to tighten. That's all we've heard about all year long, and interest rates have gone up as a result of that. But yesterday, we got the news that the first quarter gross domestic product was minus 1.4%, meaning if we get 2 quarters negative back to back, we're in a recession. And the expectation was for a 1% GDP. So this was 2.4% different than what was expected, which is an enormous miss. It was so much worse than was expected that now people are saying the Fed may have interest rate cuts on the table when they have their next meeting. And I think that's possible. But what I just want to point out is that my forecast at the beginning of the year said 1 interest rate hike in the first half, and we got our 25 basis point hike, our 0.25%. And I believe that's all we're going to get in this first half. So now it looks like my forecast is right on target. No more interest rate hikes because now there's the threat of a recession. When you have the threat of a recession on the table, you are not raising interest rates. You are looking at cutting interest rates. So I just wanted to put that out there for you because my goal is to be as accurate as possible, guiding you through the markets, through what's happening, and I hope that my interest rate forecast this year will be one of those things that I'm accurate with. All right, so let's talk about XRP because there's just so much information, and I think that from the financial perspective that I have, sometimes I can see certain things that might not be obvious to everyone. So it started out with someone on Twitter asking me this question. Linda, why do you think the U.S. government, the SEC, sued Ripple? There has to be a certain motive. I truly believe it wasn't for any wrongdoing, since Ripple is the most compliant and transparent crypto company. Well, I happen to agree with Rob Singh 75, who tweeted that to me, so I wanted to answer him. And I answered him this way. Project North Star. Ethereum is the real banker's coin. JP Morgan owns a significant stake of CSI infrastructure, and they needed a way to stall Ripple to try to beat the technology that will eventually render them insignificant. Now, there's a whole lot in there, and if you haven't followed the consensus case in CSI, and if you're not familiar with that, what it showed us was that JP Morgan was involved in financing the Ethereum infrastructure. And this article that I attached said a group of 35 shareholders of Ethereum giant Consensus AG have filed for a special audit of a 2020 deal that saw JP Morgan Chase acquire an influential stake in two of its flagship products. It goes on to say the deal, known within CAG as Project North Star, resulted in financial institutions, JP Morgan, winning a significant slice in the company's lucrative intellectual property, specifically MetaMask and Infura. Both crypto wallet MetaMask and node network Infura persist as arguably the Ethereum ecosystem's most critical infrastructure. Turns out Wall Street fat cats JP Morgan directly profits from and even controls that infrastructure. Okay, so I won't go on with that, but basically if you haven't been following that, that's what's been going on is we have uncovered that Ethereum, not XRP, is the real banker's coin. And Ethereum is also centrally controlled by just a few whales who we don't know who they are because they never have been disclosed. So somebody is controlling Ethereum that has very deep pockets, and we know now that JP Morgan is involved. So it started with that tweet. Then today, Stefan Hubert had a fabulous follow-up where he dug a little bit deeper and found out that JP Morgan, Alibaba, Swift partnered in 2017 to revolutionize cross-border payments with Ethereum. And which law firm represented both of them? That's right, Simpson Thacher. He said, that's the tweet. Oh yes, before I forget, boom. So that would explain the motive for Simpson Thacher to use Bill Hinman to obtain the free pass and why it happened so fast. We can go down the rabbit hole discussing this indefinitely, and I think a lot of our community has done a great job reporting on this already, so I'm not going to get into the whole Ethereum scandal. But what I am going to say is that the reason why the lawsuit happened was they had to tie up Ripple while the bankers were trying desperately to create their own technology that could compete or replace Ripple because they knew Ripple was going to replace them. So this is what happened. And that's why Ripple got stuck with this lawsuit that doesn't make any sense. And after 2.5 years, they found no instance of wrongdoing. It's not a security. It's already been deemed a currency by our U.S. Treasury Department and every country outside of the U.S. So this was a ploy by corrupt individuals to try to stall XRP and Ripple and keep their technology at bay while they quickly tried to come up with something else. And that's what I believe the evidence shows. So what does that mean for the lawsuit? Does that mean the lawsuit gets dismissed? Well, not exactly, because it still has to go through the judicial process. Now, the judge yesterday moved up the timeline a little bit from December to November, so that was a positive. But I'm not worried about the lawsuit because I think ultimately the lawsuit gets dismissed, maybe because the SEC is not going to be who has jurisdiction or who has control of regulation over Ripple. And here's what I mean. Yesterday, some very big lawmaking news happened, and I wrote about this on Twitter. Yesterday, the framework for a regulatory certainty in digital commodity markets was introduced in the House, and it was called the DCEA, the Digital Commodity Exchange Act. And Brian Quintenz, who is at the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, said an important bipartisan effort that would bring regulatory clarity to digital assets by codifying the original Howey decision into law and embracing the CFTC's principles-based framework. So right there, he's telling us they're going to improve upon the Howey decision. They're going to define digital assets. They're starting to give clarity and create the laws around digital currency that we need and that Ripple has been begging for years. So that's the good news. So I went and I read the bill, and two things really jumped out at me. But let me just read you my thread that I wrote. I just reviewed the Digital Commodity Exchange Act, DCEA, and two things jumped out at me. One, it says it permits, quote, trading in only digital commodities that are not readily susceptible to manipulation, end quote. So I said, if a crypto is centralized, it certainly can be manipulated, cough, Ethereum. Which goes back to what I was just saying, that a few whales own Ethereum and can control it, therefore they can manipulate it. Basically, they're saying they're only going to allow trading in only digital commodities that are not readily susceptible to manipulation. I'm just telling you, that sounds to me like Ethereum has some problems. Now, maybe they can do something with this upgrade. I don't know, but this is very serious. The second thing that jumped out at me was it also said to test that the backup resources of the digital commodity exchange are sufficient to ensure continued, quote, maintenance of a comprehensive and accurate audit trail, end quote. So what's the one crypto we know that's lacking a transparent audit trail? USDT, Tether. So then I said, which exchange can Tether impact? Since Coinbase announced it will accept Tether on all of its platforms, I agree with this article that Coinbase will suffer due to its shackle to Tether. And I attached an article from Seeking Alpha where they talked about the fact that Tether was now going to be accepted across all Coinbase platforms, and that made it very vulnerable to problems. Then I said Tether is not backed one-to-one with the US dollar as a reserve asset. Instead, it has a substantial amount invested in commercial paper, some from Evergrande, which is near default. Now remember, Evergrande is the Chinese real estate company that they talked last October about default. I said no, it wasn't going to default back then. Basically, they've done audits. They have everything ready to declare it in default when they're ready to. I think it's just a matter of timing. And then I said, if when Russia is determined by Moody's to have defaulted on commercial paper on May 4th because it paid in rubles, a default on commercial paper could become systemic and crash Tether and possibly Coinbase. I hope you don't have your crypto on Coinbase. Please move your cryptos into your own wallets. Do not leave them on Coinbase or any exchange. Now, why was I talking about Russia and May 4th? Well, that was another thread that I wrote on Twitter. Let me share with you what's going on with Russia and potential problems that we have coming up. So I said all we're waiting for is the financial problem that will bring in XRP as the solution, which is happening in Russia by them attaching rubles to gold. All is in process, and this is going to be much better than a centralized banking system we are under now. Because we know that XRP is decentralized, we know that it is the bridge currency that can handle anything of value to anything else of value. So let me back up a little bit. Remember when Russia decided not to accept US dollars and euro, and they insisted on being paid in rubles, then they attached the ruble to 5,000 ounces of gold. Well, the BRICS countries seem to be siding with Russia, so China is soon to follow, and Brazil, South Africa, India, I believe they're all going to side with Russia. They are all in an alliance. They've all been working for years on the SIP system, and that was to take over the SWIFT system. So we were looking for what is the problem that's going to bring in XRP as the solution. And I found an article that not only talked about the problem, but it gave a date. And the date is May 4th. Now let me share with you this article. So this article says Russia may be in default, Moody's says. Now Moody's is a rating agency. We have Moody's and we have Standard & Poor's. If you remember, Moody's and Standard & Poor's were the ones that downgraded the mortgage-backed securities that had all been packaged together as a mess and said that they were high quality, but in fact they weren't. And Moody's was the one that really triggered the financial crisis, in my opinion. So Moody's has a lot of power because it can be the one to declare when something is in default. And right now, it's the one that is looking at Russia, saying, is Russia in default? And it's saying it might be. So let's read this article from April 15th. Moody's said Russia may be in default because it tried to service its dollar bonds in rubles, which would be one of the starkest consequences to date of Moscow's exclusion from the Western financial system since President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. If Moscow is declared in default, it would mark Russia's first major default on foreign bonds since the years following the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, though the Kremlin says the West is forcing a default by imposing crippling sanctions. Russia made a payment due on April 4th on two sovereign bonds, maturing in 2022 and 2042, in rubles rather than dollars. It was mandated to pay under the terms of the securities. Russia, therefore, may be considered a default under Moody's definition, if not cured, by May 4th, which is the end of the grace period, Moody's said in a statement on Thursday. The bond contracts have no provision for repayment in any other currency other than dollars. Moody's said that while some Russian Eurobonds issued after 2018 allow payments in rubles under some conditions, those issued before 2018, such as those maturing in 2022 and 2042, do not. Moody's view is that investors did not obtain the foreign currency contractual promise on the payment due date, Moody's said. The Russian Finance Ministry did not respond to a request for comment on Friday. Finance Minister Anton Siluanov told the Izvestia newspaper earlier this month that if Russia is forced into a default, it will take legal action. Before Putin's February 24th order for what he casts as a special military operation in Ukraine, Russia was rated as investment grade. But its sovereign bonds have become a target in what the Kremlin says is an economic war waged by the United States. Russia in 1998 defaulted on $40 billion in domestic debt and devalued the ruble under President Boris Yeltsin because it was effectively bankrupt after the Asian debt crisis and falling oil prices shook confidence in its short-term ruble debt. So I'll skip down a little. It says this time, Russia has the money but can't pay because the reserves, the world's fourth largest, that Putin ordered be built up for just such a crisis, are frozen by the United States, European Union, Britain, and Canada. As Russia could not and would not borrow right now, a default would be largely symbolic, marking the tumultuous finale to its post-Cold War attempt to integrate into the West's financial architecture. And it goes on to say the Kremlin says the West has already defaulted on its obligations to Russia by freezing its reserves, and that it wants a new system to replace the Bretton Woods financial architecture established by the Western powers in 1944. I'll just end it there and say, so we have this back and forth about Russia's in default. Russia says, no, the U.S. defaulted. The reality is, if Moody's says on May 4th that Russia has defaulted, that would make the Russian bonds essentially worthless, which would make anyone who invested in those Russian bonds have financial issues, which would be hedge funds potentially, possibly some bond funds, possibly some financial institutions, pensions even, which could trigger a wider systemic problem. But now, with what I've told you about Tether, depending on what bonds Tether owns, if Evergrande defaults in or about the same time, or if Evergrande had any Russian bonds that are now worthless, that puts them over the edge. And you can see how this could be a domino effect and could become systemic in bond markets, which we've been looking for because I have believed for a long time that the debt has to be erased. There's too much debt in the world to ever be paid back. And this debt eventually has to be erased. And again, we're looking for what is the problem that will cause the solution to be the debt to be erased. This may be it. So all eyes are on Tether and Russia and May 4th and the bond market. And we're watching to see what happens. But should there be some sort of domino effect and the credit markets go down, we could in fact see a scenario where debt possibly could be forgiven, which is called a debt jubilee, and a reset, which would also mean that currencies backed by debt, which is any fiat currency, would also have to be reconfigured. And that's where I think XRP comes in. Because if you have fiat currencies that are backed by debt, because every time a dollar comes into existence, it creates debt, then you have to back the new currency with something of value. It's usually gold. This time, I think it's going to be other natural resources as well as gold. And we already have some diagrams talking about XRP possibly being connected to gold, XLM being connected to silver, XDC being connected to copper, Algorand being connected to palladium, and IOTA being connected to iridium. So there are 5 ISO 20022 cryptos, the ones I wrote about in my book, 3 Steps to Quantum Wealth, as part of the new banking system. And this is what I believe to be true, that they are going to be connected to these commodities of value, and the cryptocurrencies will be given this value supporting them. So they're no longer just digits, but they represent something physical. Now, funny that we're talking about commodities because the Commodities Futures Trading Commission was the one who said, hey, we're the ones that should be in charge of regulating cryptocurrencies. The commodities people, not the securities people, which is how I think the lawsuit ends. So here's my theory. What was created today was just a bill in the House. But when it goes to the Senate and then becomes law, the CFTC is going to be the one that is the regulator over cryptocurrency. At or around that same time, we have perhaps crypto being connected to gold, silver, copper, palladium, iridium, which makes it even more directly a commodity. And then once we have the law, the CFTC can say, hey, as a matter of national security, we need to drop the Ripple lawsuit and give Ripple our blessing that it has done nothing wrong. So I don't think that the lawsuit is going to play out. I think there's a good chance that the laws come into effect that make the lawsuit moot or that causes the CFTC to say this lawsuit is bogus, thereby freeing up Ripple, XRP, etc. That's how I think it goes. So I'm not worried about the lawsuit going into 2023. In the end, it was a ploy to try and slow Ripple down. It had nothing to do with Ripple. And in the meantime, Ripple's increased their business 8 times. So that's fantastic. It really hasn't slowed them down. They have over 400 relationships with banks, gaining all the time. They're doing fantastic new work. We're going to be getting Flare in July, which is going to add smart contract capability and passive income for us in, I believe, 6 different ways. So we have a lot of really positive things happening. And I think the outcome is going to be very positive. So I'm not worried in the least. This was all a big smoke screen. And to me, we're getting to the end of this road. Now, it might be another month. I don't know. It might all happen in May and it be tied up in a nice little bow in May. If that happens, fantastic. So what else do I have for you? I have one final thing to share with you, and that is Brad Garlinghouse, CEO of Ripple, was commenting about which regulator would be the most appropriate crypto regulator for Ripple. Guess what he answered? The Commodities Futures Trading Commission. It's my belief that's because the ISO 20022 cryptos are going to be given value by gold, silver, copper, palladium, and iridium, which is going to give it massive value, massive utility, massive liquidity, and we have only positive things looking out into the future for our cryptocurrencies. So hang in there, hodl, hold on for dear life. Good things are ahead, and I hope you see that now that I explained my perspective and my take on the whole situation. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Linda P. Jones. Feel free to share this podcast with your friends, family, other XRP holders. Let them know the good news and that there's a lot happening in the background that you're not going to hear about on television. And I want to thank you for 8 years of the Be Wealthy and Smart podcast. Those of you who have been here from the beginning, thank you so much. Those of you who are new listeners, thank you, welcome. And those of you who are here from time to time or have been here less than the 8 years, I just appreciate every listener, every person who enjoys the podcast. I do my very best for you every single day to try to bring you the most accurate picture forecast that I can of the future. That, I think, is going to bring you ultimate peace of mind and prosperity, which is what I want for everyone. That's all for today. Until next time, live the good life and be wealthy and smart.
Thank you for listening to Be Wealthy and Smart with Linda P. Jones. Share the wealth and tell your family and friends about the show. Check out our website, blog, and social media for more riches at www.bewealthyandsmart.com.